Thank you, Joel. I can't think of a better time for this session. The momentum building towards a net zero economy in the United States is growing at a rapid clip. Increasing amounts of companies, including utilities, are setting ambitious net zero targets. Ceres has been playing a leading role with an investor-led campaign known as Climate Action 100 Plus in North America, where we're working to move over 100 of the heaviest emitting companies in the world to go net zero, including some of the leading utilities in the country. Backing this ambitious and very historic and rapid growth of companies that are committing to go net zero by 2050, some are even committing to go to net zero by sooner, even as soon as 2040, is a very ambitious federal policy agenda as well. Climate, clean energy, and racial equity are top priorities for the new Biden administration. And the administration is looking to this net zero transition as a key driver for post-pandemic recovery, including their very ambitious and robust Build Back Better agenda. The administration recently has announced a slew of ambitious policies to expand investments in infrastructure, clean energy, including renewables like wind, solar, and offshore wind energy, and electric vehicles, to name a few. And we look forward to the announcement of an ambitious NDC in just a couple of weeks. This combination of private sector, corporate leadership, combined with federal leadership, federal policy leadership, backed up by investors that are also looking for companies to reduce their climate risks and expand their leadership on climate, is really leading us into a historic moment. And I can't think of a better time to have this conversation with Ralph Izzo, our CEO at PSEG. And I'll actually turn it over to Ralph now to talk about some of the great work that's happening at PSEG as well.
Thank you, Stephen. It's great to be here with you today. So we've been a long time participant in climate control. Actually, we signed on to climate challenges by then President Clinton. Back in 1993, we've participated with President Obama in his efforts to get cap and trade through. And we're delighted right now that we are working hand in hand with Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey on a clean energy agenda. And as you said, we have dedicated ourselves to achieving net zero by 2050, but believe that more can be done even sooner. In fact, by the end of this year, we will have reduced our carbon emissions from our power plants by 98%. Now, from 2005 levels, candidly, that's a mixture of two sets of activities. One set is the retirement of over 4,000 megawatts of fossil fuel-fired power plants. But a part of it also is the sale of 7,000 megawatts of fossil fuel plants. So those will continue to operate. We simply won't be the owner. And I think it's important for a company like ours to set an example. We're one of the 10 largest utilities by market cap in the United States. We serve over 2 million customers in New Jersey, over 2 million customers on Long Island. We are largely, once we do move ahead with the sale of 7,000 megawatts of fossil generation, we'll be largely an offshore wind, solar, and nuclear generator. And our efforts don't stop just in power generation. As a regulated pipes and wires business, we have a massive program underway right now to reduce methane emissions, fugitive emissions from our gas LDC. And my biggest pride and joy for our company is that we have agreed with our regulators on a 10-fold increase, whereby we'll be investing $1 billion over the next 3 years in energy efficiency. So it truly is a multi-pronged effort to realize a future where our customers, number one, use less energy. Number two, the energy they use is cleaner than ever before. And number three, it's delivered with unsurpassed reliability. So, thanks for being able to join you here to be able to tell our story.
That's great, and very encouraging to hear that such a large and meaningful player in the power sector is really taking the lead on all of those different fronts that you highlighted. So applaud that leadership on your part, Ralph. Maybe I'll start with an opening question around some of the challenges that you foresee as you continue down this track towards decarbonizing the grid, what are some of the greatest challenges that you envision you'll encounter in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
So I think for us, the biggest challenges will be the deployment of energy efficiency, because that's the path we're taking. And then secondly, the preservation of nuclear, since that's the second least cost way to make sure we lock in the gains we've made on carbon-free energy. And then thirdly, it'll be the maturation and the development of the regulatory process around offshore wind. If we can make progress in those three areas, universal access to energy efficiency to bring the energy intensity of our customers down, keeping our nuclear plants online. In New Jersey, our nuclear plants produce 90% of the carbon-free energy in the state. And meet this 30 gigawatt challenge of President Biden on offshore wind. New Jersey wants to be 7.5 gigawatts of that. We have a partnership with Ørsted for 1 gigawatt in hand, and hopefully we'll be able to build upon that. I would be remiss if I didn't suggest that I'm enthused by some of what the president said in terms of his R&D agenda, both in terms of advanced nuclear cycles, carbon capture and storage, further bending of the price curve for solar and wind, because we will need some of these advances to get to that sort of last yard in the emissions reduction. The one piece of the puzzle that I think is missing that I wish we could have would be an economy-wide price on carbon. Because while I have my laser focus on the energy sector, the electricity and the natural gas sector, it's entirely possible that there are more economic ways to reduce carbon in totally separate sectors. The obvious one is transportation, but maybe agriculture or various other components of the economy can help us accelerate carbon mitigation in an even lower cost manner. And I don't think you get to even ask that question in the absence of a price on carbon. But for us, I think I've stated the three biggest challenges that we're gonna take on.
Thank you. And you touched on several key issues that are quite interesting and exciting. The development of the offshore wind resources is just incredible. I mean, it's incredible to see how that industry has just taken off. You touched on scale, so really scaling up these solutions, and then price. Wondering if you might be able to speak about how these strategies might affect your ratepayers and shareholders. We've seen some analysis in California that shows decarbonization can actually reduce net energy costs for ratepayers. Is the same possible for your ratepayers and customers as well?
So it's very situational dependent. I can't speak to California, but I do know for a fact that the 1,000 megawatt offshore wind project that New Jersey has approved is estimated to add about $1.50 a month to the average customer's bill. So that would be an increase. New Jersey doesn't have the solar resources of California. We do have a fairly robust offshore wind resource. However, the supply chain doesn't exist for that industry yet. So we'll see as that matures, that price curve come down. And candidly, New Jersey has tremendous access to the Marcellus Shale, where low-cost natural gas is available. So it's a very different dynamic than we have in California. However, we should never lose sight of the fact that there's an abundance of evidence that there is a social cost of emitting carbon. And the National Academy estimates that at $50 per ton. I'm sure that President Biden and his administration will refresh those numbers. So while it looks like investments in offshore wind might impose a burden on our customers, the number I mentioned a moment ago, $1.50 a month, the absence of doing something about carbon for a coastal state like New Jersey has much more dire consequences. For us, there's no doubt that in the short term, the two most important things we have to do are energy efficiency. Our estimates are that there's a negative cost of carbon mitigation and energy efficiency. You actually lower bills while you reduce carbon. And our estimates for preserving the nuclear fleet are about $17 per ton of carbon mitigation. So those are clear winners. If you look at what offshore wind prices have been, some of the earliest projects were north of $200 a megawatt hour. Some of the more recent projects have come in at $58 per megawatt hour. Now that they too are geographically dependent, a little bit more wind resources you go up the Northeast and a little bit less wind resources you go into the mid-Atlantic. But clearly we're bending the price curve on offshore wind. So that's a very exciting future for us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Ralph. And we've done quite a bit of work with companies around advocating for a price for carbon as well. And it's really encouraging to see the amount of private sector interest that's really mobilized behind what you just, about the argument you just made around the benefits of putting that price in place. One of the key elements of decarbonizing the economy will basically entail electrifying almost every sector in our economy, transportation, heating, you name it. I was wondering, Ralph, if you might be able to speak to what role PSEG might play in electrifying multiple sectors in the economy.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree with you more, Stephen. And the first and most logical place to begin is in transportation. As you know, nationwide, transportation now exceeds electric power generation as the number one source of carbon. It's always been that way in New Jersey, largely because of our significant availability of nuclear power kept the emissions from the power sector as below transportation for as long as I'm aware of. And here, if you look at the characteristics of New Jersey, we're an ideal state for electric vehicles to experience deep penetration. We're high population density, challenging air quality, okay, but not great mass transit, high per capita income. And yet we lag behind many other states in terms of electric vehicle penetration. And that has to be due to this, this dilemma of absent the charging stations, people aren't buying electric vehicles because they're worried about range fear. And absent people buying electric vehicles, you're not going to get the charging stations. So we've asked the state of New Jersey to allow us to do what other states have done successfully, which is to jumpstart the infrastructure. So we just recently gained approval to invest $166 million over the next few years in electric vehicle infrastructure to help overcome that range phobia. Once we do that, once we give people the confidence that they can charge their vehicles either at home or on major transportation corridors, then we think we'll see that electric vehicle penetration take off. And you'll see additional market entrants excited about charging infrastructure. So that's the number one target area. Beyond that, clearly there's some opportunities in our ports and in some of our industrial applications in terms of further electrification that can follow suit. The key to all of that, of course, is making sure that the electric supply stack is carbon-free. And that's something that, as I said, will be 98% below our 2005 levels by the end of next year.
That's great to hear. Yeah, that investment in the EV infrastructure and making it as green as possible is absolutely essential to decarbonizing that sector. So glad to hear about your leadership on that front. You touched on natural gas earlier and how abundant that resource is and how important it'll be in the short and medium term. I'm wondering if you might be able to speak about sort of the issue of stranded asset natural gas resources and whether that's something that's top of mind for you.
So it is. There's a reality that we cannot ignore. There are social justice issues associated with the cost of universal access to energy services. And in New Jersey, to convert a home from natural gas usage to all electric uses on average is about $10,000. To do that at the same time when our accounts receivable, accounts that are more than 30 days old, have tripled. And to see the disproportionate impact on communities of color of COVID-19 and job loss is a little bit Pollyannish to pretend that natural gas doesn't have a role to play as a cooking and heating fuel in existing housing. Okay, so, and I'm not talking about new housing and new connections, but the pace at which conversions can and should take place, I think, is something that has to be discussed in the context of broader social issues. There's an enormous consumer dividend that our customers have realized. Our customer bills are literally 30% lower than they were 13 years ago as a result of the use of natural gas. So what we've turned our attention to is eliminating the methane leaks from pipes that are 100 years old and sleeving them with plastic so as to reduce that. However, we've made a commitment that we are not building any new gas assets, no new gas plants of any type, and are turning our electric supply attention to carbon-free sources. But the optimization and the perfection, if you will, of our current gas distribution system, we think is important from both an environmental and a consumer point of view. And again, we're in a unique position where we have little new hookups and a very aged infrastructure that's in need of that improvement. In terms of a decade or two from now or 3 decades from now, I do think that that is wise to plan in advance of that in terms of what new connections should consist of and new housing development, new commercial development. One needs to be careful that as long as the electric supply stack still is as fossil fuel dependent as it is, and I think nationwide we have about 60% of our electricity still comes from fossil fuels. To use electricity to heat the home or to cook is a thermodynamically inefficient way to proceed until that electric stack becomes more and more carbon free.
Great. And I appreciate you touching on the issues of racial equity and social justice, especially given where this country is and with that broader dialogue in the past sort of year and how the pandemic has really refocused our efforts on an issue that's been generations in the making. So encouraging to see PSEG addressing that. I think we have time for one sort of final question. And I'm wondering, Ralph, if you might be able to describe what PSEG will look like in 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, so we will be a largely regulated company. We've signaled to the marketplace that probably 90% of our earnings will come from the regulated business. I am excited beyond words about the fact that our shareholders can view an LED light bulb and a programmable thermostat as with the same economic benefit as we used to view transmission towers and circuit reinforcement. We, in partnership with Governor Murphy and our Board of Public Utilities, have expanded the definition of rate base to include those assets in the home that can and should be replaced to be more efficient and to be lower users of energy. I also think that we are headed for a future where the use of data analytics and artificial intelligence will help us, allow us to help our customers recognize when those major energy consuming devices are nearing end of life and at their least efficient stage, where they are hurting them both in the pocket and in the atmosphere as they approach the end of life and suboptimal performance. Then I also see us on the supply side operating carbon-free assets, whether that's nuclear or solar or offshore wind or some combination of all the above. And just being an instrumental participant in creating the infrastructure that allows us to meet the needs of society with a laser focus on E, S, and G. All three of those are important: the environmental consequences, the social impact. I know I sound like a broken record in terms of universal access to these services. And from a governance point of view, greater transparency in terms of the demographics of our employee population, greater transparency in terms of our donations to entities that participate in a political dialogue, and a raft of other disclosures that we're not obligated to do but choose to do. So I think our biggest source of pride once is getting an industry award for being the company that did the best job of aligning the interests of its shareholders with the needs of society. And I see a company like Public Services, which is what the P and the S stand for, continuing to be a leader in that regard.
Couldn't agree more, and great, encouraging close on such a positive and optimistic note. Thank you, Ralph. It's been a great pleasure learning about the real world tangible steps you're taking to really advance the utility sector towards net zero. Looking forward to how all of this pans out and to continuing the dialogue. Very exciting.
Thank you, Steve.